Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's program on bird watching and spring bird identification, presented by the Columbia Audubon Society. A big thank you to Jim Gast and Nancy Badan for organizing today's event. Also, the Audubon Society has provided two $25 gift cards for Songbird Station, and we're going to randomly select two of tonight's attendees as the winners of these gift cards. I'll make that announcement at the end of tonight's program, so stick around for that. My name is Lauren Williams, and I'm Adult and Community Services Manager with the Columbia Public Library, which is part of the Daniel Boone Regional Library System. Before I introduce our presenter, I want to go over just a few quick housekeeping items for Zoom. On your Zoom screen, if you hover over the Zoom window or if you tap, if you're on a device like a phone or a tablet, you should see a chat bubble icon. Click there to type your question in the chat. Jim Gast with the Audubon Society will keep an eye on questions and answer some of those questions via chat during the presentation. And the other questions I will ask Sarah to address at the end of the presentation, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. So who is ready for spring? I know that I am, and spring is prime bird watching season. We are pleased to have with us this evening Sarah Kendrick. Sarah is your state ornithologist with the Missouri Department of Conservation, and she loves her job. Sarah is a Missouri native who earned her bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Missouri, studying avian response to savanna and woodland management in the Missouri Ozarks. She coordinates and oversees statewide bird conservation plans with partners. She serves on multiple regional, national, and international migratory bird conservation coalitions. She coordinates the brown-headed nuthatch reintroduction project with partners, and that's going well, I hear. And she coordinates the Great Missouri Birding Trail. She serves as the Missouri contact for all things bird within the department and for the public. Sarah and her husband, Kip, have an awesome 5-year-old son, Abram, and they love birding, hiking, camping, and just being outside. So join me in welcoming Sarah.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm so honored that 130 people are on this thing. That just shows you how much people love birds and how excited everybody is about getting outside. So I hope everybody is doing well and staying healthy during these crazy times. Here I am reporting from my attic. I'm sure all of you have been stuck at home for a very long time, but hopefully with spring, there's some renewed hope that we can all be together again sometime soon. So I hope everybody is doing well. So thank you, Lauren. Thank you to Jim and Nancy for coordinating this webinar. I'm honored to be part of it with Columbia Audubon Society and Daniel Boone Regional Library, which is one of the best library systems. It's just great. So support your local public library and check out Columbia Audubon Society. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm just going to go over briefly. We have an hour to talk. I'm just going to go over briefly what I'm going to talk about. It's pretty diverse. But I'm going to cover bird declines and why we should care about that. We have to throw in conservation topics. I do work for the conservation department. I'm going to give you a brief intro to birding, which is a verb, bird watching, and then we'll start into spring bird ID by sight and song. And so I'm going to be brief on these. This list of birds we talk about when we get there is not exhaustive. They are mostly songbirds. I'll cover some raptors at the end. These are mostly songbirds in woody or shrubby habitats. I don't really go over a lot of grassland birds. There are a common 335 species here in the state of Missouri. So if we covered them all, we would be here for hours, and no one besides me would enjoy that. And so some of these are common birds you'll see in your backyard. Some of them are specific to habitats, which I will cover. Some are less common. So I'll point out what habitats they occur in and things like that. It's a lot of information. I don't mean to overwhelm you, but I know we have all levels of folks here on the webinar with different levels of bird knowledge. And so hopefully there will be tidbits for everyone, and hopefully everybody learned something. So again, please ask questions in the chat. Columbia Audubon Society President Jim Gast will be trying to answer some of those during the presentation, and then we'll have some time at the end. So lots to cover. I will dive right in. But thank you again for being here. So North American bird declines. So there was a large study in the journal Science that came out in September 2019. And it quantified the net loss, an estimate of net loss of birds in North America over the last 50 years. And it showed very dramatic sobering results where folks in the ornithological world were aware that birds were declining, but this paper really tried to quantify that using long-term data, long-term studies that have happened across North America for the last 50 years. So this was based on data. They found a net loss of 3 billion birds since 1970. That's about 29% of our North American avifauna have been lost in the last 50 years. So this is major, this is huge, again, very sobering, kind of depressing, but it's important for folks to know this. I don't think a lot of the public knows this. So anytime I get a diverse audience or speak to the public, I like to cover this because it's very important. So just to zoom in on one of the graphs from this study, it shows this crazy decline, but it also separates those birds out by what habitat types they use or guilds of species. You can see here on the left side of this axis down the middle, this is all -% loss since 1970. So many guilds of species in forest, Arctic tundra, western forest, boreal forest, and especially grassland birds have declined. We can imagine a lot of this is attributable to many different changes across the landscape, not just one thing. It's hard to narrow this down to why this is occurring and happening to birds across all of these guilds. You can imagine land use change has ramped up in the last 50 years. A lot of our rural areas don't look the same. There's 70+% more humans on the earth than there were then or in North America. So all of those things contribute. So when this paper came out, there were also marketing and educational pieces that came out to educate folks on this happening. So grass and birds in particular, this is happening to what species that we consider common, like eastern meadowlarks. 3 and 4 eastern meadowlarks have been lost since 1970. Their global population has decreased by about 75% or a little bit more. And so they really were trying to educate the public that this is even happening. The North American Bird Conservation Initiative. Yes, there are groups across North America who bring together agencies, both federal and state, bird conservation groups. You know, many of these bird species are migratory. They spend up to 8 months of the year outside of our country. So we have to work across borders like folks in wetland conservation have to protect these birds' habitat across their full life cycle. So NABC, this North American Bird Conservation Initiative, they came out with this ad campaign about why we should even care about birds, why we should care that they're declining. And birds provide a lot for us, for our human health, as well as the environment. So I encourage you to learn more about this and learn what you can do. If you're motivated by wine and coffee, there's even a reason for that, because a single bird can save up to 24 pounds of coffee beans, because where do our coffee beans grow? On the wintering grounds of many of these migrants. So very important stuff. So I would really challenge everybody to please consider what you can do to help our birds. This website came out with this article in the journal Science. It's called 3billionbirds.org, and it talks about 7 simple actions that you guys can do, that anyone can do today. Small changes, a little bit bigger changes that will help birds today. So if we all kind of pull in and come together on this, there's one of these things, one of these actions I think that everybody can do today. So very important part of this, not just bird ID, but we need to, well, I think we need to take action to help them out because they are declining. Okay, that's my conservation spiel / rant. So we're going to go into ID now. So everybody asked me, what do I need to start? What do I need to go out to start birding? And so talking about equipment is essential. So you need a pair of binoculars. You don't need at first, if you're backyard birding or put up a feeder. Anybody with any equipment can start birding right now. If you put up a feeder outside your back window or your back door, and you're able to see birds up close and start to identify them, start there. If you have a few extra dollars and you're able to buy some binoculars or borrow them from someone, that's a good place to start as well. But binoculars are really going to help you to see the bird close up, see the markings, see the size and shape of its bill, things like that, that help narrow down what species it may be. So binoculars are good. You don't want to get the cheapest pair because that can cause eye strain, and that will be no fun to have a headache while you're birding, and you won't want to keep doing it. Second of all, the second essential is a way to help you narrow down what birds you're looking at, and that's a field guide. So until, in the last 5-10 years, before that, everyone used paper field guides, and I still do. I have one of the books that you see on the screen right here. And if you're a super bird nerd and really get into birding, you can buy books like this called the Warbler Guide. And it's a whole book just about all the warblers you can see. You're going to get really overwhelmed. I say bird nerd lovingly, by the way. So there are free phone apps, bird ID phone apps that exist too. My two favorite are the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's Merlin app and the Audubon Society. National Audubon has a bird ID app. All of these tell you a lot of information about the bird's natural history, range maps, what sounds it makes. Some bird ID apps cost about $10 to $20, and I know that can seem like a lot, but you think how much you would spend on a book and it's about the same, and the book doesn't sing to you, whereas a bird ID app does. It can really help you with the songs as well. Everybody should write down allaboutbirds.org because it's an incredible website run by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which is a nonprofit linked up with Cornell University. And it's an online field guide, essentially. You can click around, you can see videos, listen to songs, read about its natural history. It's all free. It's a great resource. So let's get started with bird ID. It's likely that you can ID nearly all, or at least some of these birds in this picture just by their silhouettes. So let's try a few. So many of us have probably seen a bird like this, either soaring around in the sky. And while you may not know exactly what species it is, we can narrow it down that it's likely a hawk based on its primary feathers, its large wings, potentially a turkey vulture type shaped bird. What about these up in the sky? Geese. We're all pretty familiar with geese. What about this one on the line that has a pointed tail? I will pretend that everybody is saying a mourning dove, or at least a dove, narrow it down to that. What about this one on the post? Kind of looks like a gull. Or this one down here that's over by the water with that long pointy bill, a little crest on the back, tall, long S-shaped neck. It's probably a heron. So even if we don't know exactly what these birds are, we know a lot more than we think we do. And that's my point here. So there are a lot of people who are very concerned about calling themselves a birder until they know everything, but you're already a birder if you knew any of these. So congratulations, we're done with the webinar. I hope everybody had a great evening. I'm kidding. But you know more than you think you do, so don't be so hard on yourself. Give yourself a break. There are a lot of birds out there, and there are a lot of things to learn, but that's what makes birding so awesome. That's why I love it, because I never get tired of it. There's always something new to learn. And if you learn all the birds here, you travel to some other part of the world or to the other side of the country, and there's a different set of birds. So it never really gets old. So take your time with this. I don't mean to overwhelm you with all this information tonight. So don't get overwhelmed, but it takes time and it takes lots of practice, but it can be overwhelming. So I'm going to cover basic bird ID. We're going to talk about size and shape, bill and beak. It's the same thing, but people call it different things. Color markings of the bird, and habitat, where you saw the bird, and also what noises it makes, what sounds it makes. So we'll start with size and shape. So again, even if you don't consider yourself a birder, I think we all pretty much know generally what birds these are just by their shape. So if we started with the smallest one, you would say what type of bird? It's a sparrow or some sort of small bird. What about the middle one? Got those droopy wings, big feet. It's a robin, right? And this big one with the big chunky bill, it's a crow, right? And so because we'll give you a place to start when explaining birds to others, trying to get an ID. Well, it was bigger than this or smaller than this. So size and shape starts to give you an idea of how to describe the bird and get a feeling for what size and shape and things to look up in your field guide. So I try to start off by giving a few examples of how we would describe these birds. It's harder remotely and not in person, so I can't randomly call on people in the audience, but we're just going to have to pretend. So this bird on the top, you can tell it's very different than the bird on the bottom. And even if you don't know the species, you can tell that the bird on the top looks like a big circle puffball with a tail. It has no neck. It's a golden crowned kinglet. They're only here in the winter. They spend the winter here, and then in the summer they go up north and nest in the boreal forest. And then down at the bottom is one of my favorite birds. This is a scissor-tailed flycatcher. Clearly it looks very different. And if you had to describe these two birds, with the top one, you would say small bird. Also, this top bird is about this big. So very, very tiny. Very small bird. Maybe you'd say it never stayed still in a tree because it was constantly flitting around. So behavior can help you as well. The bird down below, clearly most of us would key in on the fact that it had like salmon color in the armpits, and a very, very long forked tail, which would narrow it down very quickly for someone who knew their birds. Here's two different birds. Clearly, these are very different as well. The top right bird has a very large body. It's running on the ground. It has a very long, long tail that pokes straight out the back. It has a little bit of a crest on top and a very big bill. So this is a greater roadrunner. And then the one on the bottom right is a warbler. It is a small bird. You would maybe say that it was blue and white, which is narrowing it down quite a bit for someone who knows what they're talking about or who already knows their birds. But you can tell with each of these birds that their size and shape are very different. Next, I want to talk about bill and beak, because many of us, when we go into bird ID, we instantly start talking about color. And bill and beak can actually be a little bit more intuitive and tell you more about the bird's natural history, what they eat, and what type of bird they are. So I'm going to start off with these two birds. The one on the left, you can tell it has a big, chunky bill. It is used to crack seeds because it needs that strength in the bill to kind of grind seeds apart. This is a Puerto Rican bullfinch. I got to go band birds with a professor in my undergrad in Puerto Rico, and we went and set up mist nets to capture birds to put bands on their legs, which is relatively common practice in bird science. And so we caught this bird, and when you go to get the bird out of the mist net, these birds are notorious for grabbing onto the fleshy parts of your finger. And then as a defense, they're used to grinding their beak back and forth to break open seeds. So they do that on your skin, and it does not feel great. And so you're sitting there like, you just have to endure it because you can't do anything to the bird. Because it's not their fault. They're just trying to defend themselves. So that big chunky bill is used to break apart seeds to get it to the meat inside. This bird on the top right has a very different strategy. So you can tell its bill is very tiny. It has those rictal bristles on the side, which are hypothesized to help when they fly around. This is a nightjar. This is similar to what a whippoorwill looks like if you've never seen a whippoorwill but only heard them. So those bristles are thought to maybe pull the insects into the mouth because it gives more area for the insects to fly into. However, when you look at that mouth open, this is what the mouth of a lot of these whippoorwills and chuckwills widow look like. You just can't see the sides of the bill. And so you can imagine this bird is nocturnal. It flies around at night in the moonlight, catching insects. So having a very large mouth to catch a lot of insects at once is advantageous. So bill can tell you a lot about what different birds are eating and a lot about their natural history. These are two shorebirds. This is a long-billed dowitcher on the top and an American avocet on the bottom. Clearly their bills are much, much different. The dowitcher's bill is for probing sand or soft soil for insects in wetland areas. And the bottom American avocet, they are really cool. If you want to see something cool, you need to Google a video of American avocet foraging for food. And what they do with that curved bill is they put it down in the shallow sand and they wiggle it around. They wiggle their head around and then get invertebrates up out of the sand and then sift them out with their bill. It's very, very cool. And then this crazy guy is a boat-billed heron, and they occur down in tropical areas, and they are a wetland bird, and they use that big old bill to scoop up fish. So trying to catch larger things in the water. So there are a lot of different bill types, but these are just some examples. I can tell you a lot about the bird and what it eats. So clearly most of us key in on color when we first start birding, like I said before, but it's just one way to ID birds. And I would ask you to keep that in mind, because here you see a rainbow of colors of different species, and using color to identify is easy for some species like maybe this Baltimore Oriole in the middle left, or the bluebird, our eastern bluebird, our state bird here in the middle. But even these can be tricky sometimes, so we have to use other clues besides just color. For instance, if you saw these two birds, they look very similar and they both occur in Missouri. So if you just said I saw an orange and black bird, it could be two things. It could be a Baltimore Oriole, or it could be an orchard Oriole, which is a second type of Oriole that occurs in the state. Or if you say, I saw a blue bird, blue space bird, not a bluebird. But if you're out there and you just saw a bird and you happen to see blue and you described it to someone, Well, that would narrow it down completely because it could be an indigo bunting here in the middle, or it could be a blue grosbeak on the right. But these are the common culprits for blue birds in the state. And so it helps to key in on multiple things, not just bill. So you can tell, or not just color. So when you look at this indigo bunting and this blue grosbeak, this beak is very similar to that bullfinch we saw on the previous slide. It has that big old bill for eating seeds, whereas a bluebird eats berries and insects, so its bill is much smaller and more dainty. So just ideas of things to clue in on. Also, when it comes to brown and white streaky birds, you're really not narrowing it down very much at all. But if you key in on the left with this brown creeper, if you saw it in the winter, that narrows it down some because brown creepers only occur here in the winter like kinglets do. Plus, they will just crawl up and down branches and trunks of trees. Whereas if you saw this fox sparrow foraging down on the ground, that would be a much different behavior than the creeper. So start to key in on the bill size and shape, the size and shape of the bird's body, just different characteristics like that. Where you saw the bird, was it on the ground? Was it in a tree? Things like that. And don't even get me started on warblers, especially yellow ones, because a lot of them look very similar. Again, I'm not here to overwhelm you. We're not going to cover all the warbler ID today, but we will talk about some. And just saying I saw a small yellow bird isn't going to narrow down too much. So I encourage you to key in on, whereas the bill shape won't help you with these birds, real nuances in the color and taking lots of notes in the field when you're starting out is very helpful. Okay, habitat is key as well. There are species that just won't occur in certain habitats. So if you're in a wetland, you could see birds like this great egret or this sandpiper, or if you were in a grassland, you would see birds like this dickcissel or northern bobwhite perhaps. Or if you were in forest, you would see a completely different suite of species like the Scarlet Tanninger, wood thrush, Carolina wren, or red-eyed vireo. So just take note of where you are if you're confused by a bird. It will help someone help you. And plus, habitats are all in your field guides. And so take note of that as well in your field guides. So these are two species that look very similar, and they're both technically shorebirds. So the bird on the left is an upland sandpiper. It's a shorebird by phenology, by its genetics. We often associate all shorebirds with wetland areas or wet areas, but this bird actually nests in grasslands. It nests here in Missouri in grassland. And so this solitary sandpiper on the right, it is a more common shorebird and occurs in wetlands and wet areas. But they're very different. If you saw one in a grassland, you could really narrow it down by paying attention to what your field guide says. So pay attention to those details. So birding by ear. Again, I don't want to, I know that bird ID can be overwhelming. I'm not meaning to do that. Song can make it just that much more overwhelming. So I'm going to play these songs when we go through the species, but kind of take that with a grain of salt. It may strike a chord with you to hear the song. It may help you recognize songs that you've heard before or around your yard. And that's great. Take note of that. But it's certainly not the only thing I would encourage you to key in on as a beginner, especially. But it is really fun to learn your bird songs. And when you get more experienced and spend a lot more time outside, maybe get a mentor to go birding with to quiz you once it's safe after COVID, to quiz you on these bird songs and calls. It's one of the funnest ways to bird because you hear a lot more birds than you actually see. And so over time, this is all just stuff that you will learn with time. So some of these mnemonics are helpful to help you learn bird song. And some species are actually named after their mnemonic. So we all know what a chickadee says because that's what they say. They're named after their call. And a Carolina chickadee has a 4-note call that could be like Carolina. It could help you remember the actual name of the bird. And so a tufted titmouse generally is recognized in the birding world to say Peter, 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 Peter. So you'll run across mnemonics like that are widespread and common. White Quail, Bob White is named after its call. Whippoorwill, 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 named after its call. And then the best bird of all, which is my study species for my master's, is the eastern wood pewee, and they say pewee, and you can tell because they say their name. There are other ones that are harder, like a northern parula, I think, says cheeseburger, cheeseburger, yum, yum, yum. So sometimes you just make up your own mnemonic and you sound like an idiot when you try and teach bird ID workshops. And then white-throated sparrows. They're singing some right now. They breed farther north. They're only here in the winter, but you might hear them singing out your window, getting ready to move north. And they say, Old Sam Peabody, Peabody, Peabody. It sounds really dumb, but some of these can really, really help you remember bird songs. My motto for teaching these workshops is whatever works, whatever you need to put in your brain to help you remember the birds, that's the best way. So just key in on what works for you, and who cares what everybody else thinks. If it helps you memorize it and remember, then awesome. Okay, so a few field marks. So crest, some birds have feathers that they can raise and lower, generally when they're agitated or we're not sure exactly what emotions, but if they're agitated or interested or they hear a weird noise, sometimes their crest can raise up when they're alert. There's different types of crests. This top right, this belted kingfisher has a real shaggy crest all the way down its head. And then this Carolina wren does not have a crest, just by comparison. So other color markings in different parts of the bird we key in on is a cap on the top of the head, throat, if just the throat is a different color, jotting that down in your notes can be helpful. If there's a spot or streaking on the breast or it's a different color, if there's an eye line, a dark line along the eye like this chipping sparrow, but both these birds have caps. They're different caps. You could say with this chickadee that the black went through the eye and all over the top of the head. Those are all kind of maybe too much detail, but it helps kind of to take note of these markings. Wing bars for tough groups of birds like warblers can be helpful. If you mark down whether it had wing bars or not, especially when it comes to yellow warblers, it can be really helpful to differentiate, like these two, like this pine warbler on the bottom left and this prothonotary warbler on the right. There's no wing bars on that bird. So just jotting down different things you see can be a good way to start. So I'm just going to go over like 2 slides that have little quiz birds just to give us an idea of what we would key in on if we saw these birds. These are both wetland birds. They both fish, as you may be able to tell from their very pointed, very sharp bills. So they're both found in wetland areas, but if you saw these birds separately, there are things you would key in on. The bird on the left, maybe you would say it had that shaggy crest. The one on the right clearly does not have a shaggy crest. The one on the left, again, that big fishing bill, but maybe you'd say it had like a rusty line or belt across its middle. Well, this is a belted kingfisher, and this is a female, and females actually have the rusty belt and males do not. That just may be something you'd key in on. On the bird on the right, you may say very different things if you saw this bird. It was very skulky. It usually stays very low and very still. Its legs are bright, bright orange. They're both kind of dark blue colored and they would occur in the same habitat. But you may also see the green heron outstretch its neck because its neck is very, very long. It's just scrunched down. So also look at the behavior. Kingfishers will stay up on a perch and then dive down to grab fish, whereas a heron stays low and very, very still next to the water, and then they reach out that long neck and strike. So very different behaviors, but same habitat. These are 2 species that some folks can get mixed up on, understandably. And so the one on the right, they're both woodpeckers, if you can tell by that big chisel-y big bill. They both are grabbing onto wood, onto the side of trees or in that stump. They both have the same toe arrangement, which is actually different amongst many birds. They have zygodactyl feet. There's a 50-cent word or whatever you say. Cat Cheek is laughing at me right now. And so the bird on the right has the stripes up and down its back, kind of looks like a zebra, and it has red on the head. Well, you may say maybe that's a red-headed woodpecker. Well, it's a red-bellied woodpecker. It is a strangely named bird. It actually has like a salmon reddish wash on its belly, hence the name. The one on the left is a red-headed woodpecker. And if you see a red-headed woodpecker, you will know it's a red-headed woodpecker because it has that deep cherry red all over the head, not just on the back. Deep cherry red head, and when it flies, just big solid blocks of black and white, just a really striking bird. The bird on the left, this red-headed woodpecker, occurs in woodlands, open spaces, park-like settings, maybe telephone poles. They like very open areas, whereas red-bellied woodpeckers will occur anywhere with trees. But we will cover them. Okay, so now we're getting into our species. So I'm going to go through this not super quickly. I don't want to take us over time. I think I have about 30, 40 minutes still. And so we have about 35 species to cover. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on each. I'm just going to go through the name, kind of where they occur, some markings, a little bit about the bird, and then play the song. So this is one that we are all very familiar with. I probably didn't even have to put this in there or put the name on there, but we got to start somewhere. We'll start with some of the more common ones. So this is our northern cardinal. It is a generalist, which that term means that these birds occur in very many habitats. They are not specific. They don't need a specific habitat. They're very general. So that means they're a generalist. They can occur pretty much anywhere with shrubs because that's what they need to nest in. They nest in shrubs. They can occur in urban areas. They come to bird feeders. They use habitats from open edge through closed forest. So their song is honestly kind of tricky. It can be pretty variable. It's a long string of like different clear whistles and sometimes ending in a trill. Sometimes they sound like a ray gun because everybody knows what a ray gun sounds like. But they might go pew, 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 pew for part of their song. So that can help you kind of key in. It lasts a little while, about 2 to 3 seconds. So let's listen to it. Pew, 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 pew. Sounds like a ray gun, I'm telling you. Okay, blue jay. All right, so this bird occurs pretty much wherever there are large trees. It is also kind of a generalist, but it does need tall trees to nest in. So that they can occur in woodland or forest, which I will explain later what the difference between woodland and forest is. But these birds kind of have a bad reputation as being very aggressive. They can dive bomb you if you're near their nest or they're young. A lot of us don't have great experiences with blue jays, but they are beautiful birds and they can't help it. You know, they're just blue jays. They don't know how to be anything else. And so let's not think of them as aggressive. They just protect what's theirs, stand up for themselves. But they will like eat nestlings and eggs of other birds and things like that. But every bird's got to eat. So I tend to try to stand up for blue jays, but we know their call. It's pretty common. They kind of say jay, 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 or jeer, jeer, which kind of helps us remember. They can also mimic hawks, especially red-shouldered hawks, which we'll cover that song later. But they're just cool birds. But most of us know this call. But their songs are actually really variable. They can make some really crazy sounds. Okay, so I also put a note up in the top right on our birds that occur here year round. I just think that's very interesting. That just means that they don't migrate. They're here year round. But many of our breeding birds do migrate. They go either to just out of the state to southern states in the US, or they go down to Mexico, Central America, or South America in some instances. Okay, so black-capped and Carolina chickadee. We actually have both species here in the state. Black-capped generally occur in the northern part of the state, and Carolina chickadee generally occur in the southern half of the state. These birds are also generalists. They use forest, woodlands, backyards. They come to your feeders, and they're a cavity nester, which I just point out because I think it's cool. Otherwise, most birds are cup nesters in a shrub or a tree or on the ground. So our black-capped and Carolina chickadee, if you're in the middle of the state, it's hard to definitively say which species you saw because they hybridize in this green stretch that you see on the map. And so it's very difficult to tell the difference between these birds anyway, but then it's really impossible to tell the difference if it's a hybrid, sometimes one species or the other. So the differences are, though I wouldn't quiz you as a beginner birder on these, is that on a black-capped chickadee here on the left, there's more white in the primary feathers than Carolina. These are grayer. And the line of the black on the throat and the breast is rougher on the black-capped and more clean cut on the right. These are not things I would ask you to point out to me as a beginner birder because they're so subtle and just crazy subtle that it would be hard to tell them apart. Even for great birders, it's hard to tell them apart. Their songs are different, however. So the black-capped chickadee on the left has a simple 2-note clear song. And then the Carolina chickadee has a 4-note. So we'll listen to both. They both say chickadee dee dee dee. He had to take a break. Just do one. Okay, now we'll go to Carolina, which it does 3 and mocks me. Normally does 4. There you go. And sometimes people say it as Carolina, so it helps you with the song differentiate which one you may be hearing. Okay, white-breasted nuthatch. This is such a great bird. I don't know why I like this bird so much, but they're really cool. They crawl up and down branches and trunks with their really big feet. They need those strong little toenails and just big old toes to crawl up and down all over the place. These birds occur in woodland, forest, pretty much treed habitats. They too will come to feeders to get seeds or come to your suet at your feeder. They're also cavity nester. They have this kind of slate blue back with this really cool black that comes up over the top of their head. Otherwise, they're completely white underneath, and they're pretty hard to mistake for other birds. But they climb around, they climb up under branches and stick their neck out. They have good neck flexibility, and they kind of have like a nasally laugh. They go, ha, 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 ha. Also, I recognize that I'm playing the song, so I don't have to do it first, but it's more fun that way. Okay, so in a few slides, I've talked about woodland and forest. So what the heck is the difference between those two habitats? Well, woodland is actually a habitat that requires management. It requires land management. So it requires somebody to go in there and cut out some of the trees initially, and then to maintain that open canopy, which allows for a thick vegetative layer underneath on the ground. You need to use prescribed fire on it every few years to keep down the succession of the understory. If you don't, you'll get a forest, which is also very useful and to many different species, but it's a totally different habitat. So forest, this understory, as you can see here, that's burned out with prescribed fire, it grows up very tall and thick. There's not a lot of vegetation on the forest floor because it's mostly leaf litter, because there's no sun from the canopy getting down to the forest floor to grow that vegetative layer. And so woodlands tend to be a lot more diverse systems because they have a ground layer that birds can nest on, a shrub layer, a little bit of subcanopy, and then a canopy. So there's just a lot more nesting substrate for different types of species to use. And so diverse managed woodlands are great for a wide variety and diversity of bird species. Forests are also great for many bird species, but there are more species who are declining that occur in woodland than in forest. And so it's a very interesting and very necessary habitat management that needs to occur for a lot of our declining birds on the landscape. So that's just the difference between those two habitats, which I reference quite a bit throughout. I just wanted to make that distinction. Okay, back to the birds. So here's Carolina wren. They use forest, woodland, urban areas. They nest in small, tight spaces. Sometimes if you leave your boots outside during the beginning of breeding season or an old flower pot, they just stick material in there and they'll make a little cubby hole nest in these tight spaces. You can find them out in like lean-tos or sheds with open parts of them, but they're a really cool bird. Wrens just pack a punch. They are a lot of attitude in a very small bird, and they never sit still. So they have that tail that's cocked up. They're just always moving. They're very excited, and they also will defend things, and they'll be really loud if they're not happy that you're there. But the Carolina wren has this really rich brown on top, this buffy kind of brownish color on the breast and underneath on the bottom side of its body. And that thick white eyebrow differentiates it from other types of wrens. Just very, very thick eyebrow, little bit of a curved bill, just a really cool bird. And lots of people think they say, tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. So that's really fast. It's hard to differentiate tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. And some sing very slow, some sing very fast. So this is a bird that has a lot of different kind of different dialects. Birds have that with bird song. Some, if you go to southern states where one of these birds occurs, sometimes they sound a lot different than in the north. So birds can have different dialects as well. See, that's 2 of the same song. So very slow, very fast. So just lots of variation with this song. Okay, it's our state bird, eastern bluebird. So these birds are clearly gorgeous. The males are a lot darker blue on the back and then have this rich rusty color underneath. Females are a little bit more subtle, as is the case with many female plumages, because they have to hide on a nest and be a little bit more cryptic to kind of stay hidden and hide their young when they're on the nest. These birds are also cavity nester, clearly, because they use nest boxes, which mimic natural cavities in dead trees. And so what else about these birds? These birds actually occur in Missouri year round. A lot of people think that they're migratory because they don't see as many of them in the winter, but they form kind of small flocks and they move around the landscape together looking for different food. This last cold snap in February was very hard on these birds because they don't eat seeds. They eat soft mast or berries and insects. And with the prolonged sub-zero temperatures, it's really hard for them to find insects or berries when the ground is covered with ice and snow. And so it did kill a lot of bluebirds. A lot of people are finding them in their nest boxes on their properties, dead in the box. A lot of these birds get emaciated really fast, those prolonged low temperatures, and it was hard for these birds to find things to eat. So it's assumed that a lot of those birds just succumbed because they were emaciated and weren't able to find enough food. So, every year there are extremes in a lot of years now. There are extremes in hot, cold, dry years, wet years. And all of these birds feel these different effects differently, and they have different strategies to combat that. A lot of birds may have died during this cold snap, but this is one species that we just happen to have nest boxes for, so we happen to come in contact with it more. But it's tough out there for small songbirds. It's amazing that they live as long as some of them do. So this bird's song is kind of a gurgly, low-pitched, warbly song. It's really kind of hard to describe. Okay. All right. So Indigo Bunting, this is probably one of just the most gorgeous birds. I'm going to say that about like every bird that we talk about for the most part, but this is just one of the most beautiful birds. They are so vibrant blue. They just seem to glow in certain light. And so I put two pictures here of the male. The male is brilliant blue. The female is brown with a little hints of blue in her plumage in certain light and in certain photos. But you can see these two males. This is the same bird, but in different lights. The blue refracts different. So sometimes if they're in bright sun, they just look almost iridescent, or not iridescent, but just like they glow like neon. And then if they're in the shade, they look much, much darker. So just really, really gorgeous birds. So these are shrub nesters. So they need open glade or woodland areas where there are shrubs. So sometimes along forested areas, along roads. They're pretty common birds if you're out in the woods or along an edge. So their song, they say, sweet, sweet, chew, chew, sweet, sweet. And bunt cake, I'm going to tell you how I remembered this one. Bunt cake is sweet and you chew it, and it's an indigo bunting. So while that may sound really dumb to some people, that's how I remembered it. And remember what our motto is, whatever works. Some people think that these birds say, fire, fire, where, here, here. Sweet, kind of in those double. But you hear this bird all over the place in the summer. Not usually in super urban areas, but even if you're in a suburban area or along a bottom with some trees or a creek bed or things like that, if there are openings and shrubs, there are very commonly indigo buntings. Okay, this is another species that needs shrubs for nesting, and it is on edges, usually in more, not just rural, but kind of less impacted, less urban types of areas for this species than a bunting. If you have open savanna with tons of shrubs across a lot of acreage, you will more than likely have white-eyed vireos because they like that scrubby, lots of cover type of habitat. Vireos are just really, really cool birds. They have this little hook at the end of their bill. It's called a white-eyed vireo because it has a white eye. Very few birds have white in their eye, and they have this like yellowish wash with a couple wing bars here that we see. Pretty white underneath. And they say, quick, bring me a beer, check. So the mnemonics for this bird are a lot about beer. Or they say, quick, 3 beers, quick, 3 beers. But I'll say it again before we play it, but it says, quick, bring me a beer, check. Oh, God, I went back. Hold on. Lauren's taking a picture. Quick, bring me a beer, check. Someone told me the mnemonic was quick, bring me a beer, chick, but I changed it because I didn't like that. So we're saying we're ready for the check at the end instead of saying chick. Okay, common yellowthroat. This is a really cool bird as well. They use early successional prairies with some shrubby stuff along the edges, wet meadows, open areas is what they need. Very open woodlands if they're there. Such a cool bird. I have one of these photos in our home that Napadal at the conservation department, he's one of our photographers, Napadal Pathong, and he's incredible and he takes awesome pictures, and this is one of his. So they're a warbler. They have a yellow wash underneath. They have that yellow throat all the way down the underside of their body, hence the name. They have that really cool black mask that goes down with white along the top edge. Just a really, really neat bird. Our female is pretty drab. That's okay. She's still got that yellow throat to help give you a clue. And they're a hard mnemonic. They're kind of a hard one to remember, but they say witchety, witchety, witchety. And these, you hear these a lot if you're in the right type of habitat. They are pretty common. That's the name, if you're in the right type of habitat. Okay, blue-winged warbler. You are a special, special person if you get to see a blue-winged warbler. So you should really key in on this song and what the bird looks like, because they are one of the coolest warblers. I just think they look so cool. I don't know what it is. I think it's the black line between their eye and their bill, but they just look so cool. So blue-winged warblers need shrubby open areas or edges of forests just with a lot of shrubs. Glade is an even more open area that are kind of like our Missouri deserts. They are very rocky soil, very open. They don't grow a lot of vegetation, but some shrubs. So it's just a different habitat type in addition to woodland and forests like I was talking about. But they need open areas and they need those shrubs for nesting. And so they have those 2 wing bars. Again, we key in on that. So a lot of yellow overall, a little bit of olive green on the back, some blue in the wing, hence the name. And then the 2 white wing bars helps you kind of narrow down. Plus the black and the eye line is helpful as well. And they say bizz buzz. I kind of think it sounds like they're going bizz. It does sound like that. Like they're sticking out their tongue at you. If you hear a bird sticking out their tongue at you, go find it. Okay. This is a yellow-breasted chat. These are one of the weirdest and just best birds ever. So again, I say early successional shrub scrub. So what does that mean? So when you open up a part of forest or remove some of the trees, sometimes in a clear cut, what it grows back after the clear cut is early successional, meaning it's early in the succession of the regeneration of the forest. So it grows back shrubs and lots of saplings and thick stuff because they're all competing for that sunlight. It grows in really thick and shrubby and scrubby. So that's where that comes from. And they need these open areas. They like old field with some shrubs in it because they nest in the shrubs. So they need that. These used to be classified as a warbler, but now they're in their own family in between like warblers and blackbirds. So it's very interesting. They're a lot larger than most warblers. They don't really look like a warbler. They're real chunky birds. But that bright yellow on the underside, if a bird is facing away from you, they blend in so much. But if they turn around and they're up on a perch out in an open old field like that, they're unmistakable from very far away. Their tail's kind of cocked up, sort of like a wren, but just really strange posture. When they fly across an open field to get females' attention, they make a lot of noise and they fly like this. So their body goes up and down. You can see in the picture right there. It's this male display where they fly across open areas in a very dramatic, silly fashion, making a lot of noise and with their weird song. Their song is very variable. It's chatty, hence the name. And it's kind of a mix of different coos, chatters, whistles, and wonks, which you'll hear what that means. So all these are the same bird. It can be very confusing when you're learning your bird songs. Another sound you might hear from them if they're hiding in the bushes, which, okay. This is bam. They just make a lot of crazy sounds. They're really cool birds. Okay, field sparrow. They use open woodland glade. They need shrubby fields because, again, they nest in shrubs. So they need that as part of their habitat, which generally grow in open areas, or open woodland. Sparrows are just tough, but a few things you can key in on for this sparrow is they have a pink bill and pink legs and pink feet, which differentiates them from many, many other sparrows. They just kind of have a soft look overall, whereas some sparrows are very dark brown and blacks. Field sparrow is very soft looking with not a lot of dramatic markings, just very soft looking. It's hard to describe. Plain breast, no spot, which can help you narrow it down with some sparrow species. Yeah, their song is more recognizable maybe than seeing the bird. It sounds like a dropping ping pong ball. It starts to bounce faster. Good bird. Okay, Eastern towhee. This is a bird that nests on the ground in shrubby areas. And so very secretive. They also forage on the ground. What they do is they stand in the leaf litter and then they move their body back and kick their feet back to look for insects and seeds under the leaf litter. So they need edges, undergrowth, areas where there is leaf litter because they tend to forage on the ground. But they also like these managed areas that are burned and have this open understory. The males are dramatic black on top. This bird used to be called the rufous-sided towhee, which helped describe its color a little bit more. Rufous is kind of a rusty brown red. They're black on top, white underneath, except for that bib of black. And then they have a red eye, and the females kind of replace the black for brown to blend in a little bit more. And they say, "Drink your tea." There's a field sparrow in the background. Did you hear it? And then their call is this. Dreep. You might hear that instead of the full song too. Okay, yellow-billed cuckoo. What an awesome bird. So these are quite a bit bigger than some of the other species I've been talking about. They're very long. They have a long tail. They use open woodland. They nest in like messes of like grapevine and kind of shrubby spots, like kind of up in the sub-canopy. Just really cool birds. They're white underneath, they're brown on top, so they blend in really well. They have black and white kind of stripes on the underside of the tail that you can't see in this picture. But they require those managed areas, and they're also a declining species. Their song is really cool. They go cuckoo, 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 cow, cow, cow. That's right. And now I will play it for you. Some of their sounds kind of sound like knocking wood. A lot of people in the fall, before this bird migrates out of the US, they'll say, I heard this knocking in the woods, or this sound that sounded like knocking on wood, and sometimes it's a cuckoo. Some people in different cultures have called this a rain crow. Not to predict that rain is coming if they're calling. I don't know if that's true, but this is a blue-gray gnatcatcher. They are very, very tiny. They never sit still. They make a very whiny sound that can kind of blend into the background. If you're hard of hearing, you may not hear this bird because it's very high-pitched. They require woodland and forest. They're very, very tiny. They have this little cocked tail that has white on the outsides. You see them fanning his tail right here. The males have this dark black eyebrow that makes them just look mad. But their call is kind of a whiny, wheezy two-note call that, again, can kind of blend in the background. But you hear them. They're quite common. You can see how it'd be hard to hear since they're that kind of upper register. There's so many cool birds out there. Okay, Eastern phoebe. This is a flycatcher. You may see this around your house, nesting on your light fixture around your house. You may knock down their nest because you don't want them there, and then they just make it there again and again and again. If you are okay with cleaning up their droppings, just let them nest. It's okay. But I understand why people don't want them there. But they use open woodlands, edges. They will nest right on the side of a cave entrance on the rock face. That's why it's easy for them to nest on little ledges or up in the eaves of your house or on top of your light fixtures. They're able to just stick things kind of on the side. They wag their tail when they perch. They're kind of nondescript. They're just kind of a gray flycatcher, but when they're perched, they flick their tail like this. So that's a behavior you can key in on. And they say their name. They say Phoebe, Phoebe. Okay, and then a lot of people get this one confused, although this is the best bird in the world. This is the eastern wood pewee. It's on the slide, so you know that it's true. It says it right here. Eastern wood pewees occur in savanna, woodland, and forest. So from these very open wooded habitats all the way through to very closed forest habitats. They nest across the entire spectrum because they're the best bird in the world. You hear them more often than you see them because of their pewee call, but they're generally gray. They have some dull kind of wing bars. They have a dusky vest, which you can see here. I heard it described once, them having a dusky vest, and I thought it was the funniest thing ever. They have a slight crest on top. There are a lot of flycatchers. There's a family of flycatchers that look very similar that are just kind of dull gray, but they all sound very different. And this is not in that family of those Empidanax flycatchers, but many flycatchers are kind of gray overall. So this is their song. They say their name. Kind of sounds sad. Okay, ruby-throated hummingbird. We all know and love this bird. So without coming to nectar feeders, they live and nest and forage in woodland, forest, but also backyards. As you know, they come to nectar feeders. That's what we're mimicking when we put out sugar water is nectar. Naturally, they eat nectar and small insects and feed insects to their young. Very long bill to probe those feathers, probe flowers to get at the nectar inside. They hover, they can beat their wings very fast. They use their tail as a rudder to move around like helicopter. We've all seen hummingbirds and they're awesome. The females and the young don't have that red gorget on the throat. They are duller and they have white on the outer rectrices of the tail, and they make high-pitched squeak sounds. Most of us are very familiar. And it's almost time to put out your feeders. So I would do that at the beginning or middle of April, just to be safe. Okay, black and white warbler. This is an early migrant. You may see this bird in the coming weeks. Most of the warblers will come through mid to the end of April, but black and white warbler comes a little faster. So usually every spring breakish time of year, my husband and I go to Lake Ozark State Park and we go camping. And sometimes we are lucky enough to see this bird at the end of March. So they use woodland and forest. They look like a zebra. If you hear their squeaky wheel song, go find this bird. It is one of just the most striking, crazy birds. So if you hear the sound, you hear the song, which again is very high pitched. Some folks, it may be hard to hear them. They will be crawling along the bark or along the branches, kind of like the brown creeper we talked about and the nuthatch. So they will stick to that. They won't be out in the leaves. They'll be using the bark because that's what they forage off of. And again, they sound like a squeaky wheel. So very high pitched. You can see them hanging upside down here because they stick to those branches. Really cool bird. Lauren, how much time do I have left? 10 minutes?
So it's 8 o'clock now, so we've got a half an hour until we end the program.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that's fine. 2 more minutes and then we'll go to questions.
Okay, great. Okay. We may move a little faster then. It's okay. So this is summer tanager. It uses open woodland. It needs that open canopy. It does nest in the canopy or subcanopy, but it likes those open habitats. The male is striking strawberry red all over its body with kind of a lighter colored bill. The female is yellow. And then the immature males, as they are molting into their red plumage, they look tie-dye like this picture down here. Immatures and females are yellow. And then when the males molt into their second year breeding plumage, as they're molting into the red, they look really cool, like they're tie-dye colored yellow and red. So their song is kind of hard. It's just kind of those slurred whistles. It's smoother when you compare it to a Scarlet Tanager, but if you're a newbie, that may be hard if you don't hear both of them singing at the same time. So we'll just listen to it. And their call helps you differentiate them from the Scarlet. If you just wait for them to call, you can tell the difference. So they say ticky-tuck. That's the call. Some people can mistake this one for an American robin because they sound very similar. You should say ticky-tuck at some point. Maybe. Wait for it. There it is. Ticky-tuck. Okay, so Scarlet Tanager looks very similar, but it has those striking black wings. And so if you see a bigger red bird in the forest or woodland, that's the differentiation. The female, she trades out the red for yellow, just like the summer tanager, with black in the wings as well. Its call, instead of ticky-tuck-tuck, says chick-burr. See, it's hard to tell those two songs apart. They're very similar. Chick-burr. Okay, Baltimore Oriole. A lot of us see this bird en masse when it comes through during migration. If we put out oranges cut in half out, they will eat out the inside. You can put out grape jelly and they eat that as well because they're used to eating nectar and fruit. They're bright orange underneath with just striking black on the head and back and those bold white wing bars. Females, again, traded out for the yellowy orange. Actually, as females get older, they turn more orange, which is interesting. But they have kind of a bouncy melody with like Czech scratchy notes mixed in there. Okay, ovenbird is a really cool bird. They need mature forest, and so you're really only going to see these birds if you're in a large tract of mature forest with a lot of leaf litter on the ground. This bird kind of looks like some of the thrushes because it has white with black spots on the chest, but it is a warbler and it has that orange stripe down the middle of its head, which is just really, really cool. Their song says teacher, 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 and they put the emphasis on the second syllable. And they're called an ovenbird because they create nests in the leaf litter on the forest floor that look like an oven. So you can see the bird's orange stripe on its crown right down there. It's sitting on eggs in its nest, just hidden in that little oven on the ground. So here's what their song sounds like. It's very loud, very piercing. Really cool forest bird. Wood thrush is another bird that some people could mistake the ovenbird with. It's brown on the back. It has spots on the chest. They also need kind of larger tracts of forest, except they nest up in the subcanopy. Thrush songs are some of the just most beautiful sounding songs that there are. Thrushes have a very complicated syrinx, which is the voice box. And they're just able to make incredible songs. I encourage you to look up the song of the hermit thrush, which is here in the winter, but they just have such a gorgeous song. So do wood thrush. They're just able to make such kind of ethereal, flute-like sounds. A lot more complicated than other ones we've heard. It's always fun to hear that song echoing through a forest. Okay, brown-headed cowbirds are really awesome, but very frustrating to some people. So these are a bird that is they use a variety of forested habitats for nest parasitism. Nest parasitism is when this species is just one here in the United States that's a nest parasite. And what that means is the females will dump their eggs in the nests of other birds, and then they leave. And then the host species, the nest in which the egg was laid, will raise the bird, not knowing that it's not their young. cowbird eggs have evolved to hatch quicker. The young grow faster. And so their first, the young that hatch have an inclination to push out the other eggs or young from the nest so that they can compete and be the only mouth that is being fed in the nest. So the males have this brown head, a black body. The females are just drab brown. They're more abundant near agricultural lands because they leave their eggs in the morning in some poor sap's nest, and then they go forage most of the day, generally in open or ag fields. This is actually a really amazing adaptation from these birds following herds of bison across the landscape. So they're called cowbirds because they followed these herds across the landscape. They ate the insects that were kicked up around these herds. And so because they moved with these herds across the landscape, they didn't have time to set up a nest territory, build a nest, defend a nest, lay eggs, have young, and stay in one place because they were nomadic. And so they evolved to lay their eggs in the nests of other birds for them to raise, and then they keep moving on. And so it's a really cool adaptation, but it can be kind of hard on declining bird species because these unknowing birds, these warbler type small birds end up, this is the young of a cowbird that's like 3 times as large as the parent, and they don't notice. They just feed the young like they're their own baby. So they kind of make a watery, dripping water sound. It's really kind of crazy. They also make whistle notes. I'm gonna pause that and go to the other one. Yeah, so there's a lot of them out there. They parasitize a lot of species. Okay, red-bellied and red-headed. I'll just do these together. So we talked a little bit about this earlier. They have this zebra black and white stripe back on the red-bellied. You can see the red wash on the belly that it's named after. And then the red-headed has that deep red all over the head with blocks of black and white color. Red-bellied woodpeckers are a lot more generalist if there are trees. A red-headed woodpecker, as I said before, needs that open treed environments, park-like settings with lots of space between trees. And these birds are declining a lot more. Red-bellied woodpeckers are doing fine. They've also adapted to urban areas a lot. But red-headed woodpeckers require that open, kind of more managed setting. And so they're kind of declining. They're less common. And so this is a red-bellied. Most of us probably hear that commonly. Okay, and then the red-headed, the prettier the bird, the worse the sound. They just kind of scream at you. It's true in some cases, but not all. So Downy and Hairy, I like to do these together as well because they're pretty much twins. It's just one is larger and has a bigger bill. So the Downy woodpecker is on the left. They are just kind of a smaller version. They both have this black and white. The males have red on the back of the head. The females do not in the top picture. A big difference between these two is the length of the bill. And so this sounds weird, but if you pretended to fold the bill back on the head of a Downy, it would only go halfway across the head. I'm sorry that URL keeps popping up. But the bill is about half the width of the head. Whereas with a Hairy here on the right, it's nearly the entire width of the head. If you folded it back, it would cover nearly the entire width of the head. The point is that the Hairy woodpecker has a much bigger bill. It just sticks out way, way farther on its face. It's also much, much bigger in size, but if you don't have them on the same feeder, like in this photo, it's very hard to tell the difference. The Downy, its rattle, which is its call, gets faster at the end. A little squeak call. So it kind of gets a little faster at the end, whereas a Hairy woodpecker, it stays the same speed throughout. Plus, their squeak is much higher pitched, like a dog poi. But again, subtle differences to someone who's new at it, and that's okay. So this is a pileated woodpecker or pileated woodpecker. Both are acceptable. I say pileated. I think I'm in the minority there. But they're our largest woodpecker. You know, if you see a pileated woodpecker, it's always special to see one of these birds because they're huge. It's kind of crazy to think that an ivory-billed woodpecker was twice or 50% larger than this bird. It's hard to imagine a bird that large. And they just kind of laugh at you. And it echoes because they are loud. We're at 8:10. Okay, I'll go faster. I'm on the raptors. There's only a few. Okay, so sharp-shinned hawk and Cooper's hawk are two that are tough for folks in the winter because they both occur here in the winter. Sharp-shinned has a small head. It's a small rounded head that looks relatively small for its body size. So its head looks kind of small compared to the size of its body. Both of them look the same. They both have this steely gray back and red and white barring down the front and a red eye in the adults. They have a squared off tail though. So if you see them flying or perched, they have a squared off tail, whereas Coopers have a rounded tail. They also have these long stick legs that poke out. So if you see them perched in your backyard or camped out on your feeder, sometimes taking, trying to get your birds and eat them. Hawks got to eat too. And you want to tell the difference. Coopers, by comparison, have a blockier, squared off head. It's a much bigger head. It looks more proportional to their body. They have a graduated rounded tail as opposed to a squared off one. This is an immature. The immatures also look the same between the two. So you got to look for that head shape and size and the tail. Also, Coopers occur here year round. Sharpshins are only here in the winter. So if you see one in the breeding season months, you know it's only a Coopers because Sharpshins only breed up here in the boreal. Broadwing hawk is a migratory species that breeds here. So we won't see them yet, but pretty soon. They're a forest bird. They nest and forage in the forest, which is kind of uncommon for some of our other raptors that hunt out in open areas. They're heard more often than they're seen because they're pretty sneaky, but they say picky. They have fat black and white bands in their tail. If you see them soaring, that can help you ID them. And if you're lucky enough to see a migratory flock, all of this entire global population makes the same migratory pathway through a tiny funnel in Mexico called Veracruz. And you can see huge flocks of these birds migrating through as they come back north and head back south. Red-tailed hawk, very common. You see a lot of them along roadsides in the winter, especially hunting. Lots of variation in this bird. There's generally a white V on the back if you see it perched. Yes, the red tail, but immatures won't have that. And they all have these dark patagial marks on the leading edge of the wing. If they look different, you can always key in on these. And they make the sound that an eagle makes on TV. Eagles do not sound like that. They have this black belly band, brownish belly band that you can see from afar that sometimes helps. Red-shouldered hawk are here year-round as well. They were a declining species that has really grown in abundance. They're really reddish on the underside and on the underside of the wings. They also have these black and white bands in the tail, but that red really sets them apart. And they have a repeated kia, kia sound. You'll hear them soaring around, sometimes in your neighborhoods if you're in a suburban area. And blue jays mimic this often. Okay, mini quiz time. Okay, so you're on the honor system and you can get a sheet of paper and write these down. So number one, I'm going to go really fast because we need a little time for questions. But number one, it's our brilliant blue bird. Not a bluebird, but a blue space bird with some black in the wings. And then our second one has these dark patagial marks. We just saw it. That's red on the tail. Here's our zebra bird we talked about. Here's the one with the black and white barring on the back and a red belly. Here's one that's black on the top and rufous on the sides, but it's been renamed. Number 6 is a song. It says, sweet, sweet, chew, chew, sweet, sweet. What is sweet that you chew? Let's remember. And here's our bright red bird with no black wings. And it's a beauty. Okay, we're going to go through them. Number 1. Indigo bunting. That's right, everybody. You learned so much during my bird ID webinar. That's great. Number 2 is, yes, it's a red-tailed hawk. How did you remember from 2 slides ago? This is a black and white warbler, very self-explanatory. Red-bellied woodpecker. Number 5 is an eastern towhee. It says, drink your tea. Number 6, what says sweet, sweet, chew, chew, Lauren? What is sweet that you chew? Bunt cake. You eat bunt cake. It's indigo bunting. And then a 7 is a summer tanager. Okay, this is a cool way to practice. ebird.org/quiz has a really cool photo and sound quiz. You pick the part of the world you're in. You can quiz yourself on Western birds if you want. You pick where you are, you pick the time of year. You can just quiz yourself on winter birds or summer birds or spring birds. You choose photos or sounds and it gives you a bunch of stuff to quiz you. No two quizzes are ever the same. You choose Carolina Wren because you learned that this is a Carolina Wren in this presentation. And then, yeah, it's great. So thank you, everybody. I apologize I went over time. I appreciate your willingness to attend, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have some that Jim has not already answered.
We do have several questions in the chat. The first one, Jim did address in the chat, but there were a couple different answers, so I just wanted to see what your opinion is. What is the best field guide? Someone had asked, they wanted a user-friendly one with actual pictures, but Jim mentioned that illustrations might be better because of the different lighting and other things. So do you have a favorite field guide you recommend?
So it's hard for me to recommend one. I'm not supposed to recommend whose things to buy, but the one I use the most is this National Geographic one. I think it's the best one for birders, and get one for Eastern United States. Don't just get one. It's tempting to begin with one that's just for Missouri. One exists out there that's just for Missouri, but that's not going to have your migrants or things that you happen to see that are just moving through the state. So I would encourage you to get an Eastern one. I like the Nat Geo one. I like Sibley. The Sibley guide is another good one that I use a lot. I do like ones with drawings because it can show you a lot of variation that a photo can't. So this is a picture of a red-headed woodpecker that we just learned, feeding an immature one. So you get the different plumages, and there's usually not enough space to put all those photos and every lighting, like Jim mentioned, in a book.
A good question. And this is one I have too. What's the difference between a call and a song?
So it's kind of, I don't know if there's a definitive differentiation. Generally, a song is just more melodic. And there is a difference because a call can sometimes just be like a short, abrupt sound that they make rather than a song that's proclaiming their territory and that they sing from a perch to say, this is my space and these are my resources and my mate, as opposed to a call, which the females don't always sing either. And so the sound they make is often described as a call. So it's just kind of a shorter communication, I think, than the song that the male generally gives.
Okay. All right, someone's going to make me do a bird song.
Nice.
So Jordan asks, I hear a bird spring, summer, and fall in northern Missouri that says, I'm a Jeep, I'm a Jeep. Any clue?
I'm a Jeep, I'm a Jeep. Oh, God. I might have to outsource that to Jim or other birders on the...
This is a Hail Mary, they said, so it's not David Case. You're like, oh,
yeah. I want them to email me. I want you to email me, and I want you to record it on your phone or call me and say it to me so I know what you're saying.
There we go.
So please do that.
That's a great solution. Someone else asked about your go-to brand of binoculars. What binoculars do you like?
Well, it's another one that's hard because I don't want to recommend a brand. I don't think I'm allowed to, but it varies so much. So Vortex makes a good line of binoculars that are not cheap, but they're not the most expensive ones. I mean, you can spend up to $1,500, $2,000 or more dollars on a pair of really nice binoculars, which I did not do for a very, very, very long time. And so you have to think of it, it's an investment. You're going to use it a lot. You don't want to cause eye strain, so you want to spend some money. So if you can swing a few $100s, I think Vortex are pretty good. There are a couple other brands that are around that price range that have gone out of business in the last few years. So I think that's the best brand if you're kind of mid-level, but do your research. There's a lot of good websites. Audubon, National Audubon has a website that breaks it down by price range. And just Google best birding binoculars, and there are a few different sites that have broken it down for birders to help them figure out what you want.
Okay, here's a specific question about bluebirds. Someone asked, we are feeding a shelled seed from Songbird Station and bluebirds have been feeding on it happily. Is there any downside for using that type of feed?
No, it's actually nice for bluebirds because, as I said, they don't have that seed crunching bill and they really hurt recently with that cold snap. And so that's great. And if they're eating it, that's wonderful. Some people are hit or miss with bluebirds. They put out mealworms, which you can also feed to bluebirds. Or sometimes their bluebirds will eat suet, But bluebirds move in flocks. A lot of species in the winter move around in flocks, and so it's kind of hit or miss. They'll put out everything, mealworms and everything else, and they say, well, they're just not coming to my yard. And it's often nothing that the homeowner is doing. It's just the birds haven't found them or have moved across their yard yet to know it's there. But that's great, and I'm sure it helped out your bluebirds a bunch during this cold weather.
Here's another specific bird question. Other than nectar feeders, what are some favorite potted annuals for our ruby-throated hummingbirds?
Ooh, that's a great question. So that is on our MDC website, but Cardinal creeper is a good one. Now I'm on the spot. I'm not going to be able to remember other ones, but please go to, if you just type in MDC or Missouri Department of Conservation, native plants for ruby-throated hummingbirds, it's there. There's a list of natives you can buy. And I forgot to put up in a plug during my talk for native plants. So that's one thing I really push in the wake of these bird declines. It's an easy thing that folks can do. Even if they live in an apartment and they have a balcony, you can buy a pot and put out some native plants on the pot or on the balcony, because it attracts native insects, and then birds eat the insects. And if you have a lot of acreage and you're able to put out many acres of natives, that's even better, because it will attract native insects and help birds down the line through the food web. So
where are good woodlands and shrubby areas on public land around Columbia that would be good for bird watching?
Ooh, that's a good one. There's a lot of public land around the state. So there's places to go, part of the MDC website. It's mdc.mo.gov. And that's a great place to look. Just start, I encourage you to just start visiting a lot of these public lands. My favorite go-to places are Eagle Bluffs, which is an incredible place to bird, very popular, probably the most visited birdie MDC area in the state year round. I like Three Creeks Conservation Area a lot. It has a lot of mature forest, but also has open shrubby fields and things like that. Lots of cool diversity. Those are my two kind of go-tos around Columbia. But there are a lot of really, really good MDC areas around town.
Okay, here's a great question. What are the top 3 reasons that you would say why birds are awesome, all capitals, and how can we help them, or conservation actions, which you've answered part of that?
What a great question. I think I know who asked that one. My top 3 reasons. So birds are awesome because of their vast diversity. So they eat all things. They eat seeds, they eat insects, they eat mammals, they eat other birds. And they look all different ways. You never get tired of it. If you're in the most urban part of the world and the most remote in the world, there are always birds. They are so adaptable and occur everywhere we go. So there's always ones to see and learn from. So their adaptations and just their vast diversity are probably my favorite part. Their great beauty, in addition to their ecological roles they serve, they eat 400 to 500 million tons of insects a year. In 1 year. Like, think how bad the world would be if we didn't have birds to enjoy, but also to do these ecological roles that we depend on. Our vultures and other scavengers eat all the dead things on the landscape. So it's a human health advantage. It doesn't, those nasty viruses and diseases don't affect other wildlife. They don't affect humans. They just serve so many ecological roles, and they bring so much happiness and joy to everybody. The things that people can do for birds, I talked a little bit about it. Plant native plants, shrubs and trees on your property or in your yard. If you have problem windows at your home where birds fly into the window and die or are stunned consistently, those add up. It's the second highest contributor to bird mortality in the world, is collisions with buildings, windows, and things like that. And so if you have a problem window or just part of your home where birds fly into, or your business, put up opaque stickers kind of close together, like every foot on the outside of the window, to break up that reflection so birds don't think it's a pass through. So that's a big one. Buy shade grown coffee, which is a kind of a confusing one, but in Central America, where a lot of these birds occur, shade grown means that there are native canopy trees over top of coffee shrubs. And so it grows a better tasting coffee, and it leaves the canopy for birds to forage in. Our birds that breed up here, they go down there for the winter. And so do research and look for bird-friendly coffee, bird-friendly beef. There's things all of us can do to help with these bird declines. But all of those with more information are at 3billionbirds.org.
Excellent. Well, I think that was our last question, and we just have a few minutes to wrap things up and also to do our gift certificate prize drawing here. On behalf of the library and the Columbia Audubon Society, Sarah, I really want to thank you for this delightful presentation. Someone in the chat, a couple of people said your enthusiasm is contagious. This was really, really fun. And I want to thank our attendees as well. I think we're all ready for some bird watching. And I'd also like to announce that this morning when Sarah and I were doing some practice for this event, she agreed to come back during the summer. Our summer reading theme for all ages this year is Tales and Tales, T-A-I-L-S and T-A-L-S. So animals and stories. So we'll have more bird fun this summer for both adults and children. So if you have a particular Missouri bird topic you want to hear about, go ahead and put that in the chat to let us know. We'll take suggestions. And also I put in the chat for your reference the link to the library's website, the events page where links to past events, past recordings of past events get posted. So this session is being recorded and it'll give us a couple days to get it edited, and then we will have it up there for you to view. The Columbia Audubon Society, I'm putting their website there in the chat as well. And like I mentioned, they have sponsored 2 $25 gift certificates to Songbird Station. And I used a random number generator to fairly choose 2 of our attendees tonight. And our winners are Anne Marie Gortmaker and Dean Hargett. Those are our winners. So I will reach out to you via email to get your mailing addresses so that Nancy Badan from the Audubon Society can get your gift certificates to you. So congratulations. All right, so again, on behalf of the library and the Audubon Society, thank you for being here. And thanks to all of you online for sharing your evening with us. Be well and good night.
Thanks, everybody.